Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Ashley and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting you the certification and approval regulations as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approval in the Asia Pacific. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today we'll be going over the requirements for radio frequency and telecommunications approvals in the Asia Pacific. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in Asia Pacific. If you have any questions on the topics presented today or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. Here are the Asia Pacific countries we will go over today. We are going to go over Japan, Australia, Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Vietnam, and New Zealand. It is a lot, but we will go over how to get approved in all these countries. First up, we will go over Japan. The Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, MIC, has jurisdiction over many things in the nation's framework, but we will be talking about the Telecommunications Bureau, which covers wireless communications technologies. The three forms of certification are Technical Regulation Conformity Certification, so they test each individual radio equipment, Certification of Construction Type, meaning they test one unit, and self-confirmation of technical regulation conformity, which is the self-declaration. Specified radio equipment certification is mandatory. Unlicensed station is 20 classes like WLAN, Bluetooth, cordless telephone, low power security system, UWB radar, short-range devices. And then licensed station is 38 classes with CDMA, WCDMA, LTE. Other licensed stations are 101 classes like base stations, wireless access system. And then we have specified radio equipment. Certification is optional. There's 15 classes of specified radio equipment designed as special equipment. It's special because it really disturbs operation of other radio stations, and you're allowed self-declaration in this case. Now let's take a look at the certification requirements. Testing can be done locally or in country. You need 1 to 2 samples. Your lead time depends on complexity. The documentation you need is block diagrams, schematics, antenna specification sheet for RF approval, data rate, test report, external photos, drawing, or pictures of product, picture of each PCB layout, user manual, and ISO 9001 certificate of applicant and assembly factories. Lead time can be as fast as 1 to 2 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks, depending on product complexity. Family model grouping. Family model grouping is allowed. The models in the family grouping must be based on the same design. They may differ only in options, versions, etc. Permissive change. This means that product hardware and the software are modified in a way that affects or may affect conformity with the technical requirements. The product must be subjected to additional testing. The additional test report and all other supporting documentation are submitted with a modification application. Labeling, here's the label on the right. The product marking, our mark is radio equipment, 3 digits is the CB identification, and 6 digits equipment identification. The requirements, size should allow for easy identification, and then if we do simplified marking, the removal of ministerial ordinance symbols in the identification number and different construction types will be stored in a database. This marking is simplified and previously it was more complicated. So in terms of surveillance, MIC will purchase merchandise from the market and examine it for any non-conformance and contact the supplier to correct it, and then they will investigate further what happened. So some of the offenses are refusal to submit radio equipment to or provide reports to MIC, fines up to 300,000 yen, unauthorized use of mark, up to 1 year imprisonment, fines up to 1 million yen, non-conformance or interface, up to 1 year imprisonment, fines up to 1 million yen, unauthorized changes to equipment, fines up to 500,000 yen. So that covers Japan, MIC. Now we will go into Australia, ACMA. So the regulatory body for wireless telecommunications, broadcasting, media, and internet is the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA. And conformity certification system is declaration of conformity. The supplier must maintain all compliance records, including device description, test report for each applicable standard, and DOC. Must be registered as an ACMA supplier. So regulated products in Australia get separated into 3 categories, level 1, 2, and 3, and increased in risk of device. Level 1 is mainly just digital products, level 2 is laptop computers, things like that, and level 3 are potentially used in close proximity to the body, like smartwatches and things like that. So the requirements for medium and high-risk products, testing, if no existing test reports available, can be used locally or in-country, 1 to 2 samples, lead time depends on complexity, documentation, product technical specifications data sheet, test report, user manual, application forms, and then a local representative is required, and then approval is 1 to 2 weeks lead time. So family model grouping is allowed in Australia. If products have the same electrical characteristics appear on the same test reports, then they can be grouped into one family. Permissive change. This means that product hardware and or software are modified in a way that affects or may affect conformity with the technical requirements. If new testing and reports are required, then the declaration will require revision. SDOC, if for ended-use device, although demonstration of compliance with radio aspect through radio modules reports can be used. Here is the label for the regulatory compliance mark RCM, and this is their simplified marking. So the regulatory compliance mark must be registered with ACMA to use, can be recognized in New Zealand. Make sure it's legible and visible, at least 3 millimeters in height. Permanent e-labeling is allowed. Package and documentation labeling is allowed. Required for all product risk categories. Compliance audits can be triggered from random selection in the database or if they receive written complaints or safety concerns. So try to avoid mislabeling and try to stay in compliance with the ACMA. Penalties are administered as units, so 1 unit equals 210 Australian dollars. For companies, you may be fined up to 315,000 Australian dollars or 2 years imprisonment for individuals with any non-compliance found. So that covers Australia, ACMA. Now we will go into Indonesia, SDPPI. The regulatory body of radio frequency spectrum and standardized information technology equipment in Indonesia is SDPPI, Directorate General of Post and Information Resources and Equipment. The acronym doesn't really fit because the acronym is from the Indonesian translation of that. And then type approval, certification of telecommunication tools and devices. Previously, SDPPI was DGPT, Directorate General of Post and Telecommunication. There are mandatory certification required for 50 product categories such as Bluetooth, wireless LAN, some examples: smartwatches, console games, laptops, computers, tablets, smart refrigerators, air conditioners, wireless storage devices, etc. Some exemptions are government regulated, so the exemptions are for the purpose of state security and defenses, the purpose of special official services, and the purpose of government agencies. Now for the requirements. Testing can be tested locally or in country. You need 2 samples. Lead time depends on complexity. Documentation, you need product spec, internal and external photos, user manual in English and Indonesian, test software, operation procedures, test reports if available, block diagram, circuit diagram and schematics, certification forms. A logo representation is required. And then lead time is 6 to 9 weeks, certificate valid for 3 years, and needs to be recertified. Keep in mind that 6 to 9 weeks is a long time, so keep that in mind if this is a country you're considering. Family model grouping is not permitted. Certificates are issued on a per model basis. Change of certificate applications, change in name of certificate holder, or change of certificate holder's address, original SDPPI certificate, a name change deed signed by a notary. A transfer of certificates, you need the original SDPPI certificate and deed of certificate transfer agreement signed by a notary. And technical changes are allowed, but if there is any certificate change on the RF spec, then a new certification is required. So upon approval, the manufacturer is obligated to mark a product with the associated label, and the product label needs a certificate number, a unique PLG ID number, a warning label statement, a QR code, and the requirements are the label must be attached to each device that has obtained the certificate, and warning signs must be attached to each package of the device. A QR code must be attached to each package of the device. There are 2 things that can happen here if there is non-compliance: suspended or revoked. So, for certificate suspension, technical non-conformity, non-compliance, not followed up within specified time period, misuse of conformity label or certification, and for certificate revocation, the product in question is no longer produced, the client does not want to review the certificate, insufficient corrective actions taken or not taken within specified time period. So that covers Indonesia, SDPPI. Now we will move on to Singapore, IMDA. So the regulatory body for wireless telecommunications, broadcasting media, and internet in Singapore is Info Communications Media Development Authority, IMDA. In terms of registration in telecom equipment, there is 3 ways. General registration is declaration certified and evaluated by certification body. A simplified registration may use a declaration of conformity, prove through a test report that equipment is conforming to IMDA's technical specifications, and then a supplier's declaration, which you need conformity assessment on the equipment as per IMDA's technical specifications and approval of IMDA for sale or use of radio communication equipment. So a list of the regulated product categories: land mobile radio, radio LT base stations, wireless broadband access, LT, TV white space devices, ultra-wideband, dedicated short-range communication and ITS, short-range devices, mobile terminals, broadband access equipment, low-power devices, digital broadcasting systems. In Singapore, there are no radio communication products that can be exempt from IMDA approval. Now for the requirements. Testing can be tested locally or in-country. You need 2 samples. Lead time depends on complexity. Documentation, a general description and photos of equipment, sales brochure with technical data, test reports, featured, supported, and then lead time is 2 to 4 weeks, product dependent. Local representative is required. Certificate valid for 5 years. Family model grouping is also not allowed in Singapore, and there are 2 classes of modifications: Class 1, where reassessment is not required, and Class 2, where reassessment is required. So, in Class 1, change in enclosure size, shape, or color, change in driver software, change in PCB layout without schematic changes, changes is SAR that does not affect compliance. Class 2, change in TX antenna, change in output power or radiated field strength, addition of new network interface card or change in existing interface card. All other changes not categorized as a Class 1 modification. So here is the product label. For labeling, you need a statement of compliance with IMDA standards. It can be affixed on the instruction manual or packaging. E-labeling is allowed with instructions to locate the e-label. Requirements: label size 17mm by 9mm, and prior approval is necessary to use a different size. Advertisements for non-registered or labeled equipment must state "for export only." Surveillance: supplier to submit the test results or evidence of equipment certification as proof of conformity with the applicable IMDA technical specifications. IMDA's enforcement team responds to public complaints. IMDA verifies registration every week. Penalties: up to 10% of the annual revenue of the business from the license, or up to 1 million SGD, whichever is higher. So that covers Singapore IMDA. Now we will go into Hong Kong OFCA. Hong Kong Office of the Communications Authority OFCA. The certification scheme is HKTEC, Conformity Assessment Scheme, Hong Kong Telecommunications Equipment Evaluation and Certificate. There are 2 schemes under this, the Voluntary Certification Scheme and the Compulsory Certification Scheme. Under the voluntary scheme, you must make sure your equipment complies with the test report. Compulsory meaning mandatory. A mandatory type approval must be obtained before equipment can be used or offered for sale in Hong Kong. regulated products, compulsory certification, citizen band radio equipment, land mobile radio equipment, aeronautical mobile radio equipment, fixed link equipment, ISM equipment, voluntary certification, cordless telephones, DECT equipment, 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz radio communications, DTS or FHSS, 27 MHz apparatus for 109 MHz short-range portable radio, pagers, 3G LTE mobile phones, RF, and 865 to 868 MHz, 920 to 925 MHz. Requirements. Testing can be done locally or in-country. You need 2 samples. Lead time 2 to 3 weeks, depends on complexity. Documentation, circuit diagrams with values and tolerance components, technical operating manual with detailed equipment description, operation, and technical parameters. Photos showing circuit layout, internal-external photos from all sides. Block diagram, test support, application forms. Approval process takes 2 to 4 weeks. A local representative is not required. Lead time is 3 to 6 weeks, product dependent, and no expiry. Family model grouping is not permitted. Certificates are issued on a per model basis. Modifications. Supporting documents should be submitted to show that the radio equipment to be modified continues to comply with the required technical performance. Cosmetic changes, such as in color, is not considered a modification. Prior approval from the certification body is required for any alteration in model, number, brand name, or other particulars information of the equipment. No electrical or mechanical change shall be made to the equipment without prior approval from the certification body. So labeling in Hong Kong is voluntary but is encouraged. Here's a sample of the label, and although labeling is voluntary, manufacturers, suppliers, and dealers are encouraged to affix labels prescribed by the CA to their certified equipment for consumer guidance. The requirements are ZZZ certification body core assigned by OFCA, YY is year of issue, XXXXX is the serial number of certificate issued during the calendar year, and the label may be printed on the packaging materials and or user manuals if it is not practical to affix on the outside surface of the equipment. So some of the offenses are use of unauthorized frequencies, unauthorized sale and dealing of radio transmitters, unauthorized modification of radio transmitters, a level 5 fine, imprisonment for 2 years. Causing interference is a level 5 fine, imprisonment for 6 months. Other penalties up to 1 million Hong Kong dollars depending on type of non-compliance and how many times it has occurred. So that covers Hong Kong OFCA. Now we will go into Malaysian SIRIM, serum. In Malaysia, you may have heard of serum. It is the Standard and Industrial Research Institute of Malaysia, governed by MCMC, and the certificate is issued by CMCS, Communication and Multimedia Certifications Section. Compliance approval is type approval, and then special approval is for communications equipment, which is to be used exclusively by the applicant. Here are the regulated product categories on the left, and on the right you have examples. Equipment is exempt if it is for personal or company's own use, for trials, market surveys, or demonstration, exhibition purposes without network connection, research and development, and training. Testing must be done in country, up to 4 samples, and then documentation, equipment information, and equipment technical specification, principal manufacturer information, declaration of trademark brand name, authentication letter, external internal photo, user manual, test reports, administration documents, local representative is required. Lead time is 3 to 6 weeks. Product dependent, 1 to 5 year validity. Family model grouping is not permitted. Approvals are issued on a per model basis. Each model is subject to an application under its own certificate. Modifications, parallel by comparison application allowed for approved model that has no change on communications characteristics and performance, safety, EMC, and SAR or radiation hazards if applicable. Cosmetic change such as in color is not considered as a modification. Any changes on the radio characteristics warrants a new certification. So product label is the MCMC logo. Labeling either ABC, CID, HID. DM is a local manufacturer, F for foreign manufacturer, 12 is the year, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is a unique ID number, can affix on the instruction manual packaging, e-labeling is allowed with instructions to locate the e-label. Requirements are 8mm by 8mm minimum size. If on packaging, must occupy an area greater than 1% of the external surface. So Serum carries out routine market sampling and surveillance at least once a year. Sample certified equipment for the purpose of verifying complaints, offenses, non-compliance with technical standards, falsifying information, unauthorized use of spectrum, compromising public safety, and then penalties, suspension, cancellation of certification, recall of communication equipment, fines up to 500,000 MYR and/or 5 years imprisonment. That covers Malaysia, Serum, and now onto Vietnam, VNTA. So for Vietnam Verification and Certification Center of Vietnam Telecommunication Authority, VNTA, type approval and declaration of conformity are the 2 ways into Vietnam. If you're going the technical route, you will still need a declaration of conformity for clearance. Regulated products, product categories, radio transmitter transceiver using frequency 9 kHz to 400 GHz, having RF transmit power from 60 megawatts upward. Fixed LAN mobile communications equipment, broadcasting television service equipment, short-range devices like wired Bluetooth, RFID, DTS, DSS, UWB, radar equipment, high-frequency digital transmission equipment, and then for exemptions, certain low-power devices and devices grandfathered in from old circulars. Requirements. Testing can be done locally or in country. You need 2 samples, 2 to 3 weeks for lead time depending on product complexity. Documentation, technical specifications, external photos, reports, user manual. Lead time is 3 to 4 weeks, product dependent. Local representative is required. 2-year validity. Family model grouping is not permitted. No family model rules. Each model needs to be tested and certified. For modifications, cosmetic change such as color is not considered a modification. Any change on the radio frequency characteristics warrants a new certification. For IT products, the ICT label is required. The code is the management code provided by VNTA. The name is the management information registered to VNTA. Surveillance in Vietnam. Approval authority will conduct inspections frequently but at random. If they find out the importer does not comply with the Vietnam regulation, they will destroy the non-compliant products or ask the importer to return the goods to the exporter. That covers Vietnam VNTA. Now we will go over New Zealand RSM. So last but not least, let's take a look at the Radio Spectrum Management RSM in New Zealand. They require declaration of conformity, so the supplier must maintain all compliance records including device description, test report for each applicable standard and DOC. Regulated products, categories SRD, personal communication, maritime, aeronautical, safety services, land mobile, fixed services. And then A1 is a low risk, like garage door openers, baby monitors, wireless enabled devices, radio controlled toys, and other short range devices. A2 is medium risk devices such as cordless telephones. A3 is high risk, like citizen band radios, emergency position indicating radio beacons, paging systems, and mobile radios. Exemptions are SRD radio transmitter installed in a vehicle at the time of manufacture, and military radio transmitter of the New Zealand Defence Force or cooperating country. Requirements can be tested locally or in country. You need 1 to 2 samples. Documentation, a clear photograph, block diagram, circuit diagram, promotional material, service manual, operating manual or user guide, list of modular pieces or accessories packaged with the product, installation manual, test reports. A local representative is required, and then it's 2 to 4 weeks for lead time. Family model grouping is permitted if products have the same electrical characteristics, appear on the same test reports, then they can be grouped into one family. Permissive change. This means that product hardware and/or software are modified in a way that affects or may affect conformity with the technical requirements. If new testing and reports are required, then the declaration will require revision. SDOC, if for end-use device, although demonstration of compliance with radio aspect through radio modules reports can be used. So the product marking is the RNZ mark, and the requirements are legible and visible, at least 3 millimeters in height, permanent, e-labeling is allowed, documentation that accompanies the product when it is supplied to the user sets out a method for displaying the compliance label. Package and documentation labeling is allowed and is required for all product risk categories. So in terms of surveillance, radio inspection audit on the following: correct labeling, SDOC, product description that clearly identifies the product, test report as evidence of compliance to the correct standard, product variant statement if relevant, and offenses, wrong label, unlabeled equipment, unauthorized use of label and symbols, unauthorized equipment usage or sales. unlicensed operation or possession of equipment, non-compliance with RSM, and false statements. So that covers all of the Asia Pacific countries. This concludes our webinar of the Asia Pacific Market Access Certifications and Approvals for Electrical Equipment and Wireless Products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for approval and certifications, as well as what requirements are applicable to your products. VISTA Compliance Lab specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices. We are a 17025 accredited EMC RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types in countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.